My parents refuse to buy my kids Christmas gifts. If you help us more, maybe they'll get something, they said. So I stopped sending money, and a week later. I always knew my parents weren't the warm, nurturing type, but I never thought they'd stoop this low. I had been supporting them financially for years, paying their bills, covering unexpected expenses, even slipping them extra cash when they claimed they were struggling. It wasn't easy. I had a wife, 2 kids, and a mortgage of my own to handle. But they were my parents. And no matter how ungrateful they were, I still felt responsible for them. That changed last week. Christmas was coming up, and for once, I decided to ask them for something, just a small gift for my kids. Nothing extravagant, just a token to show that they cared. It wasn't like I was asking for anything for myself. I should have known better. My mother scoffed, waving a hand dismissively. If you helped us more, maybe they'd get something. I blinked, not sure if I had heard her right. More? I repeated. Mom, I send you money every single month. Dad leaned back in his chair, arms crossed. And do you think that's enough? Do you know how much we struggle? I clenched my jaw, trying to stay calm. I struggle too. But I still manage to take care of my family. Mom rolled her eyes. Oh, please. You have a house, a car, a good job. We have nothing. Nothing? I wanted to laugh. They had my money. My help. My patience. I stared at them, waiting for even the smallest sign of remorse. A hint that they knew how unfair they were being. But all I saw was entitlement. And that was the moment I decided I was done. I left their house without another word. Normally, I would have stayed, argued, maybe even caved in and offered them extra money just to avoid the guilt trip that always followed. But this time? This time was different. The entire drive home, my thoughts raced. I had spent years bending over backward for them, yet they had never once shown any gratitude. Not even a simple, thank you? It was always about what more I could do. What I owed them. As if being their son meant I had to carry their burdens forever. By the time I pulled into my driveway, my decision was made. I walked inside, kissed my wife, ruffled my son's hair, and sat down on the couch. Then, I pulled out my phone and did something I should have done a long time ago. I canceled the monthly transfers to my parents' bank account. No more automatic payments. No more emergency funds. No more treating them like they were my responsibility. I had a family of my own to take care of. At first, I expected immediate backlash. My phone in hand, I waited for the flood of angry calls and messages. But an hour passed. Then 2. Then the entire night. Silence. They hadn't even noticed yet. I almost laughed. Of course, they wouldn't. They were so used to my money magically appearing in their account that they probably wouldn't realize something was wrong until bills started bouncing. And when that happened? Well, I was curious to see what they'd do. It took exactly 6 days. 6 days before my phone started blowing up with calls from my mother. At first, I ignored them. Let her sweat. I knew exactly why she was calling. By the 7th call, curiosity got the better of me. I answered, keeping my voice calm. Hello? Do you think this is funny? She snapped. No greeting. No pleasantries. Just straight to the accusation. Classic. I leaned back on the couch. What are you talking about? Don't play dumb, she hissed. The money. It didn't come in this month. You forgot to send it. I almost laughed at how quickly she had assumed it was a mistake, because in her mind, there was no way I'd actually cut them off on purpose. No, I said simply. I didn't forget. Silence. Then, her voice dropped into that fake sweet tone she used whenever she wanted something. Honey, we're behind on the bills. You know how hard things are for us. You can't just stop helping. Actually, I can, I said, enjoying how good it felt to finally say those words. I have my own family to take care of, and I'm done putting you two before them. The sweetness vanished. How could you do this to us? She shrieked. We raised you, and this is how you repay us? I clenched my jaw, forcing myself to stay calm. You didn't even want to get my kids a Christmas gift. I said coldly. You literally told me if I helped more, maybe they'd get something. Well, now I'm not helping at all. So I guess that means nothing for them, right? She spluttered, caught off guard. That was a joke. You're being ridiculous. No, I said. I'm being fair. Then I hung up. And for the first time in years I felt free. I expected my parents to be furious. I expected them to call back immediately, maybe even show up at my house, demanding an explanation. But instead? Silence. For the next few days, nothing. No calls. No texts. Nothing. At first, I thought maybe they were trying to punish me with their absence, hoping I'd feel guilty and cave. But I knew them too well. This wasn't pride. This was denial. They still believed I'd come crawling back. It wasn't until a week later that reality must have finally hit them, because my dad, who never called me unless he needed something, rang my phone late one evening. I let it ring. Then he called again. And again. By the fourth call, I picked up, keeping my voice casual. Hey, Dad? Something wrong? The moment he spoke, I could hear the tension in his voice. Son, listen, we need to talk. I almost laughed. Son. Now I was son again. Not ungrateful or selfish, just son. Amazing how quickly things change when they needed something. I leaned back in my chair. Talk about what? There was a pause. Then, the tone I had heard my entire life, the one that mixed disappointment with manipulation. Your mother and we're in a tough spot right now. Bills are piling up, and without that money, we're falling behind. I didn't respond. I wanted to see how far he'd take it. I know you're upset, he continued. But don't punish your own parents over one little misunderstanding. That was it. That was the moment I knew he still didn't get it. To him, it wasn't years of using me as a walking ATM. It wasn't the way they had dismissed my sacrifices, my struggles. No, to him, it was just one little misunderstanding. And I was done letting them frame it that way. I took a deep breath and said, If you had respected me more, maybe I would have helped you. Then, before he could respond, I hung up. And this time? I blocked their numbers. For good. Blocking their numbers felt like taking the first deep breath after years of suffocation. No more guilt-tripping phone calls. No more last-minute emergencies that always required my wallet. No more feeling like my existence was only valuable as long as I was useful to them. For the first time in a long time, I was free. And I planned to enjoy every second of it. Christmas was only a few days away, and instead of stressing over how much money I had to send my parents, I spent my time doing something I should have been doing all along, spoiling my wife and kids. I went all out. I bought my son the gaming console he'd been dreaming of. I got my daughter the giant dollhouse she wouldn't stop talking about. My wife, who had been my rock through all of this, deserved everything, so I made sure to get her something special too, a weekend getaway, just the two of us, something we hadn't been able to afford in years because I had always put my parents first. When Christmas morning came, the joy on my kids' faces was worth everything. For once, I wasn't dreading my phone buzzing with demands. I wasn't holding my breath, waiting for the next crisis. I was just happy. But I should have known my parents wouldn't stay silent forever. Because while I was celebrating with my family, they were stewing in their misery. And they weren't going to let me off that easily. Christmas came and went, and for the first time in years, I felt like I had finally broken free from the weight of my parents' constant demands. My wife and I watched as our kids played with their new gifts, their laughter filling the house in a way that made me realize just how much I had been missing. But peace never lasts long when you're dealing with people like my parents. It started subtly at first. A few missed calls from unknown numbers. Then my wife mentioned that someone had called the house phone, asking for me but hanging up when she answered. I knew exactly who it was. They were testing the waters, trying to see if I'd crack first. I didn't. Then, on New Year's Eve, they finally snapped. It was late, just past 10, when my doorbell rang. My stomach dropped. I didn't even need to look outside to know who it was. My parents never visited unannounced unless they wanted something. My wife glanced at me. Are you expecting anyone? I shook my head, already heading for the door. Peeking through the window, I wasn't surprised to see my mother and father standing on the porch. Mom had her arms crossed tightly over her chest, and Dad looked more annoyed than anything. I opened the door but didn't step aside. What are you doing here? Mom scoffed. Are you really going to leave your parents standing outside in the cold? I raised an eyebrow. Why not? You didn't mind leaving my kids with nothing for Christmas. That hit a nerve. Mom's lips thinned, and she glanced at Dad, as if hoping he'd jump in. He didn't. Instead, he sighed and ran a hand through his graying hair. Look, let's just talk, he said, trying to sound reasonable. This has gone too far. Too far? I almost laughed. But I was curious. What was their play here? An apology? A guilt trip? Another demand for money? I leaned against the doorframe. Talk about what? Mom let out an exasperated sigh. We're struggling, okay? Bills are overdue, we're behind on rent, and we don't have anything left in the fridge. We're in real trouble. I tilted my head. And? Her eyes widened like she couldn't believe I wasn't immediately offering to fix everything. And? She repeated, her voice sharp. And you need to help us. We wouldn't be in this mess if you hadn't cut us off so suddenly. There it was. The same entitlement, the same lack of accountability. I crossed my arms. You mean you wouldn't be in this mess if you had planned your finances instead of relying on me like a paycheck? Or if you hadn't wasted the money I already gave you? Mom's face flushed red. How dare you speak to us like that? How dare I? I echoed. You didn't even think my kids were worth a $10 gift, but now I'm supposed to bail you out? Dad finally spoke up, his voice low. We didn't think you'd actually go through with this. That did it. That one sentence told me everything. They had never believed I had the guts to cut them off. In their minds I was still the same kid desperate for their approval. The same son who would always put them first, no matter how badly they treated me. I smiled coldly. Well, now you know I meant it. Dad clenched his jaw. So that's it? You're just going to let your parents suffer? I pretended to think about it, then shrugged. Maybe if you respected me more, I would have helped you. Mom gasped like I had slapped her. And before they could say another word, I shut the door in their faces. They banged on it, yelling my name, but I didn't care. I had a family to take care of. And for once, I was finally putting them first. The banging on the door lasted another full minute before it finally stopped. Through the peephole, I watched my parents exchange frustrated glances, clearly unsure of what to do next. For a second, I thought they might try to force their way inside, but eventually, Mom shook her head and stomped off. Dad followed, muttering something under his breath. I waited until I heard their car pull away before I turned back to my wife. She stood in the hallway, arms folded, her expression unreadable. They'll be back, she said quietly. I nodded. I know. And I was right. For the next few days, they bombarded me with messages, some angry, some desperate. Mom, how can you be so cruel? We're your parents. Dad, you're making a mistake. We won't forget this. Mom, please, we're starving. Do you really want that on your conscience? But I didn't respond. I wasn't falling for it. Not this time. Then, on the 5th day, my sister called. Now, my sister and I weren't close. She had always been the type to stay out of family drama, pretending like it didn't affect her. But now she wanted to talk. I let her call go to voicemail. But she left a message. Hey, I don't know what's going on between you and Mom and Dad, but they just called me crying. They say they have no food, no heat, and that you won't even talk to them. Look, I know they can be difficult, but they're still our parents. Can you at least hear them out? I stared at my phone, debating whether to call her back. And then I realized something. They weren't just reaching out to me anymore. They were trying to turn the rest of the family against me. It was a classic move, one I had seen them pull before. The second they didn't get what they wanted, they played the victims, twisting the story to make it seem like I was the villain. I exhaled slowly, shaking my head. I wasn't going to let them control the narrative this time. So I did something I'd never done before. I called my sister back. She picked up on the first ring. Finally! I've been trying to reach you. I cut her off. Did they tell you why I stopped helping? She hesitated. They said you just suddenly decided to be selfish. I let out a bitter laugh. Of course they did. Then I told her everything. The years of financial support. The complete lack of gratitude. The way they refused to get my kids a single Christmas gift, claiming I didn't help enough. And when I finally put my foot down, they tried to manipulate me into caving. By the time I finished, my sister was quiet. I had no idea, she finally said. Because they didn't want you to, I replied. They'd rather you believe I'm the bad guy than admit they brought this on themselves. She sighed. I mean, I get why you're mad. But don't you think cutting them off completely is a little harsh? I closed my eyes, taking a deep breath. Let me ask you something, I said. How much have you helped them financially? She was silent. Then, quietly, she admitted, I haven't. Exactly. She might have felt guilty, but I didn't. Not anymore. I had done my part. More than my part. And I refused to be guilt-tripped into sacrificing my own family's happiness for two people who never once appreciated it. If you feel bad for them, you're welcome to send them money, I told her. She didn't respond. Instead, she muttered, I'll think about it. But we both knew she wouldn't. Because deep down, she knew the truth. Our parents had made their bed. And now? They were finally being forced to lie in it. After that call with my sister, things went quiet. Too quiet. No calls. No texts. No sudden appearances at my doorstep. At first, I thought maybe, just maybe, they had finally given up. Maybe they realized I wasn't coming to their rescue this time. But deep down, I knew better. Then, a few days later, my wife got a text from my mom. I don't know why he's acting like this. We're his parents. Maybe you can talk some sense into him? I almost laughed when she showed me. They really think I'm going to change my mind just because they go through you? I muttered, shaking my head. My wife smirked. They don't know me very well, do they? She typed out a response right in front of me. He made his decision. I support him 100%. Don't contact me again. And just like that, she blocked my mom's number. I pulled her into a hug, pressing a kiss to her forehead. I don't deserve you. She smiled. No, but you do deserve better than them. For the first time in years, I finally believed that. Days passed, then a full week. The silence from my parents should have been a relief, but instead, it felt like the eerie calm before a storm. I knew them too well. They weren't the type to just accept a loss. They were biding their time, planning their next move. And I was right. It happened on a Sunday afternoon. My wife and I had just finished cleaning up after lunch when the doorbell rang. She gave me a wary look. You think? Yep. I sighed, already knowing who it was. I opened the door, and sure enough, there stood my mother. But this time, she wasn't alone. She had brought my father and, of all people, my sister. I raised an eyebrow. Wow. A whole intervention, huh? Mom clasped her hands together, her face a carefully crafted mask of sadness. We just want to talk. I almost laughed. Last time you wanted to talk, you demanded money. What's different now? My sister stepped forward, looking uncomfortable. Just hear them out, she said. Please. I debated, slamming the door in their faces. But something in my sister's eyes made me pause. She wasn't just here to defend them, she was genuinely conflicted. I sighed. Fine. I stepped aside, letting them in. They sat stiffly on the couch while I leaned against the wall, arms crossed. Go ahead, I said. Let's hear the speech. Mom wasted no time. We're struggling, son. We made mistakes, okay? But you don't abandon family. You've always helped us before. Why change now? I scoffed. Why change now? Because I finally realized helping you wasn't helping me. Every time I gave, you took. And not once did you ever appreciate it. Dad leaned forward, rubbing his temples. We were never ungrateful. I laughed. Really? Then why did you tell me my kids didn't deserve Christmas gifts because I didn't help enough? If I wasn't giving, I was worthless to you. Just admit it. Mom opened her mouth, then shut it again. My sister cleared her throat. Look, I get it, she said, looking between us. They've relied on you for too long. But cutting them off completely? It's a lot. I turned to her. You still haven't helped them, have you? She looked away. That was all the answer I needed. I'm done, I said, turning back to my parents. I have a family of my own. A real family, one that actually values me. And I won't let you drain me dry just because you refuse to take responsibility for yourselves. Mom's expression turned ice cold. You're making a mistake, she hissed. I smiled. No. I'm finally correcting one. Then, without another word, I opened the door. Leave. Dad muttered something under his breath, but he stood. Mom hesitated, glaring at me like she was trying to burn guilt into my soul. It didn't work. One by one, they stepped outside. But just before I shut the door, I looked at my sister. You should think about why they came to me first, I told her. And why they'll never ask you. For a moment, she looked like she wanted to say something. But then, with a sigh, she followed them down the steps. I locked the door behind them and leaned against it, exhaling. My wife appeared in the hallway, watching me carefully. You okay? I thought about it. The years of stress, the guilt, the exhaustion of always being their safety net. And now, the weight was finally gone. I smiled. Yeah. I really am. A few days passed, and for the first time in years, I felt at peace. No more desperate phone calls. No more guilt trips. No more being treated like a human wallet. My parents? They never reached out again. Maybe they finally understood I wasn't coming back. Maybe they just moved on to their next target. Either way, it didn't matter. I had my family, my real family. The one I had built. The one that actually cared about me, not just what I could provide. One night, as I tucked my kids into bed, my son looked up at me and smiled. Dad, this was the best Christmas ever. And in that moment I knew, walking away was the best decision I had ever made.